Carl Jung understood better than most that the bonds we form with others are never only about them. They are also about us. The attraction we feel, the dependence we cannot shake, the longing that remains even after someone has left our lives, all of it points inward as much as outward. To detach emotionally from someone is never a simple cutting of ties. It is a slow unraveling, threads running deep into the unconscious mind. Threads woven from memory, from desire, from pain, and from the hidden parts of ourselves that once found a reflection in the other. Jung wrote often about projection of the psyche. He believed that much of what draws us to another person is not only who they truly are, but also what we unconsciously place upon them. In this sense, the other becomes a mirror, a vessel carrying pieces of our own unacknowledged soul. This is why detachment can feel impossible. Because when we try to let go of them, we are also being asked to release parts of ourselves that we are not yet ready to face. The first step, then, is not to fight the bond, or declare it meaningless. Jung would remind us that every emotional tie carries value, even those that end in heartbreak. To love someone, to need them, even to suffer because of them, all of it reveals truths about our own depths. It shows us what the conscious mind may not admit. Perhaps we are searching for safety. Perhaps we are drawn toward what remains unresolved from childhood. Or perhaps we are simply confronting our longing to be seen, in a way the world rarely allows. Whatever its shape, the tie tells a story about us. Detachment does not begin with cold rejection. It begins with recognition. Jung believed in bringing unconscious forces into the light of awareness. The emotions that bind us must first be understood without judgment. When we name the feeling, when we accept its presence, we begin to loosen its hold. For as long as we resist or deny it, the bond will remain hidden and powerful, like a river moving underground. To detach emotionally requires courage, the courage to see clearly why the tie was formed in the first place. There is also the matter of individuation. Jung described this as the lifelong process of becoming who we truly are, distinct from the masks we wear for others. In many relationships, especially those that leave us shaken, we discover how much of ourselves we have surrendered. To detach means to call back those fragments. It is not a cold act of forgetting, it is a warm act of returning. We take back the energy we projected onto the other. We gather what belongs to us, and hold it close again. This is not easy. The psyche does not release its attachments in silence. It clings, it mourns, it resists. Jung understood that the unconscious is not tamed by willpower alone. We cannot force ourselves to stop caring, any more than we can command a wound to heal overnight. What we can do is make space. We can let grief unfold without shame. We can sit with longing without feeding it. We can listen to the inner voice that whispers beneath the noise, and ask not how to silence it, but what it is trying to tell us. Detachment, then, becomes less of an erasure, and more of a transformation. The other person remains in memory, but their presence changes form. Instead of being an open wound, they become a chapter of our inner history. Instead of a chain, they become a teacher, even if they never meant to play that role. Jung often said that what is rejected in life returns in disguise, until it is accepted. Emotional ties follow the same pattern. They bind us, until we see them not as accidents or mistakes, but as messages guiding us inward. So the path of detachment begins gently. It begins with honesty. It begins with the willingness to see the bond, not only as a connection to another human being, but also as a reflection of the inner self. And in this recognition, a strange comfort can be found. Because even if the other person has gone, or cannot be reached, the part of ourselves we once sought in them is still here, waiting to be claimed. As Jung would insist, the true work of detachment does not take place on the surface of life. It unfolds in the deep layers of the psyche, where symbols and archetypes move unseen. When we are bound to someone emotionally, we often imagine that our suffering is about them alone. But the unconscious reveals otherwise. Beneath the pain lies an image, an ancient pattern of the soul seeking wholeness through another. We may call it love, or dependency, or obsession, but at its core, it is the psyche yearning to complete itself. This is why detachment can feel so brutal. We are not only losing a person, we are losing an image of completion that we had unconsciously projected onto them. The beloved became the answer to our incompleteness. They carried what Jung called the anima or the animus, the hidden opposite within us that longs to be realized. In their presence, we felt more alive, more whole, more awake. To detach means to pull this projection back. It is like withdrawing the sunlight we once cast upon them, and realizing that the source of that light was our own soul all along. The difficulty lies in the fact that we resist this withdrawal. The conscious mind cries out for the other person, while the unconscious insists that the missing pieces are ours to reclaim. It creates a tension, a painful stretching between desire and necessity. Jung taught that growth often emerges from such tension. It is in the unbearable space between holding on and letting go that transformation begins. We are invited to endure what feels unendurable, until the psyche reshapes itself around the absence. One of the deepest dangers is to confuse detachment with indifference. To detach is not to harden the heart, or to pretend the other meant nothing. That is repression, and repression only drives the attachment deeper into the shadows. True detachment requires love, but a different kind of love. It is a love that honors the connection for what it was, yet refuses to remain enslaved by it. It is a love that allows the other person to exist, without needing them to define our worth. This process is inseparable from grief. Jung often described grief as a necessary passage into new consciousness. The heart must break, for the psyche to grow. Each memory of the other, each pang of longing, each night of restlessness, is part of the soul reshaping itself. If we try to rush it or deny it, the wound only festers. But if we allow grief to have its time, the pain eventually softens into wisdom. We learn not only about the other person, but about ourselves, about our hunger for recognition, our fear of abandonment, our capacity for devotion. And here lies the paradox Jung returned to again and again. To detach emotionally is to reclaim what was ours, yet at the same time, it expands us. The bond does not vanish into emptiness, it transforms into depth. The other person no longer holds the pieces of our soul, but they leave behind a map showing where those pieces were hidden. Every lost relationship, every painful tie, becomes another signpost in the journey of individuation. Without them, we might never have discovered certain truths about who we are. So when we speak of detachment in the Jungian sense, we are speaking not of cold distance, but of integration. It is the act of turning inward, gathering the projections, and owning them. It is the courage to say, what I thought I found in you is also within me, and I will no longer chase it outside myself. Such a recognition does not erase the bond, but it loosens its chains. It allows us to walk forward, carrying the memory, but no longer weighed down by the need. In this way, detachment becomes an act of freedom. Not freedom from love itself, but freedom from the illusion that love must always bind us to another. We begin to discover that the deepest form of love is not possession, but presence. It is the ability to hold someone in the heart, without clinging, without demanding, without losing the thread of our own becoming. And when this freedom arises, even the most painful attachment begins to release its grip, for the soul has finally recognized that it was never incomplete at all. Jung often reminded us that the psyche is not a machine to be controlled, but a living organism that grows and heals according to its own rhythms. When we attempt to detach from someone, we may expect a clean break, an immediate relief, as if cutting a rope. But the unconscious resists such abrupt severing. It does not obey the demands of the rational mind. It moves in symbols, in dreams, in quiet shifts that often go unnoticed until much later. Detachment therefore unfolds, not as a single decision, but as a gradual transformation, carried out in silence beneath the surface of our awareness. This is why dreams become so important during times of separation. Jung paid close attention to the way figures of the beloved return in sleep, not to torment us, but to guide us. The unconscious speaks through images, and when we dream of the one we cannot let go of, it is often showing us what remains unresolved. Sometimes the dream reveals longing, sometimes anger, sometimes forgiveness that has not yet been given. These dreams are not obstacles to detachment, they are part of the process. Each dream is a fragment of the tie, being worked through in the depths, until the psyche has exhausted its hold. In waking life, the struggle often appears as a constant return of thought. The mind circles back again and again, to the person who is gone. It feels obsessive, yet Jung would say it is the psyche trying to digest what has happened. Just as the body cannot swallow a heavy meal in one bite, the soul cannot release a deep attachment in one motion. It must turn the memory over again and again, chewing it slowly, until it becomes something that can be absorbed into the self. This repetition, painful as it is a sign that the work is being done. There comes a point when the longing begins to change. At first it feels raw and urgent, a desperate reaching outward. But over time, it softens into reflection. The memories no longer burn, they begin to glow with a quieter light. This is the unconscious signaling that integration is taking place. The energy that was once projected onto the other is slowly being drawn back home. What was once an open wound begins to form scar tissue. Not to erase what happened, but to protect it, as part of the inner story. Jung believed that every encounter, especially those charged with deep emotion, has a purpose in the journey toward individuation. To detach from someone is not to erase them, but to understand the role they played in awakening us. Perhaps they carry the image of our hidden strength, or our neglected tenderness, or our unhealed pain. Once we see what was carried, we can release them with gratitude, even if their presence also brought suffering. For in the language of the psyche, suffering itself can be a teacher, a sharp hand guiding us toward the truths we most resist. The greatest shift comes when we begin to sense that the bond no longer defines us. We can still remember, we can still feel, but we are no longer bound. The energy once caught in longing becomes available for creation, for growth, for the pursuit of new meaning. Jung described this as a return of libido, not in the narrow sense of desire, but in the broader sense of life energy. What was once trapped in a single attachment is now free to flow into the larger work of becoming whole. And in this moment, we discover that detachment is not abandonment. It is not the act of pushing away, but the act of letting the other person rest in memory, without clinging. We carry them, not as a weight, but as part of the mosaic of our lives. They become a symbol within us, rather than a presence outside us. This transformation is subtle, yet profound. It shifts the center of gravity, from them back to ourselves. The heart remains open, but it is no longer enslaved. Such is the quiet victory of detachment. It does not announce itself with triumph. It arrives almost unnoticed, one day, when we realize that the thought of them no longer pulls us under. We can breathe freely again. We can look back, without being held captive. And we understand at last what Jung meant when he said that only by withdrawing our projections do we become free to know ourselves. There is a moment in every journey of detachment when silence begins to speak more clearly than words. The storm of emotion subsides, the endless rehearsing of memory grows quieter, and what remains is a stillness that feels at once foreign and familiar. Jung would call this the beginning of integration. The psyche has taken back what it once cast upon another, and in the process, a new center of balance emerges. This does not mean that longing has vanished completely, it means the longing no longer controls the rhythm of life. At this stage, detachment reveals itself less in dramatic realizations, and more in subtle shifts of being. We notice that the world around us begins to open again. Colors return to their brightness, sounds regain their depth. Ordinary days no longer feel like burdens to be endured. The energy once absorbed in clinging to the image of another has begun to flow back into life itself. Jung insisted that psychic energy is never lost, it only changes direction. When released from attachment, it does not vanish, it transforms into new creativity, new clarity, new capacity to engage with the world. The danger here is to confuse this stage with indifference or repression. Indifference is a refusal to feel. Repression is a burying of what has not been faced. Integration is different. It allows us to remember, without being consumed. It allows us to feel gratitude, even for pain. It allows us to look at the figure of the other in memory, and see them as human, no longer as a savior, no longer as a wound. This shift is quiet, but profound, for it marks the return of wholeness. In Jungian terms, this is the retrieval of the projection. The anima or animus, once placed upon the beloved, is now drawn back into the self. The qualities we adored, or the wounds we repeated, are recognized as our own. This recognition is not abstract, it changes the very way we live. If we projected strength, we begin to cultivate our own strength. If we projected tenderness, we begin to honor our own tenderness. If we projected wounds, we begin to tend to those wounds directly. In this way, the loss becomes a rebirth. Such work is never completed overnight. Jung often wrote that individuation is the task of a lifetime. Detachment is not the end of relationship, but part of that larger unfolding. Each bond, whether joyful or painful, becomes a thread in the tapestry of becoming. To detach is to weave that thread back into the fabric of the self. We do not cut it away, we place it where it belongs. And what arises from this process is a new relationship to love itself. No longer is love experienced as a desperate reaching for completion in another. It becomes instead an act of recognition, of wholeness in both self and other. To love without clinging, to care without consuming, to honor without enslaving, this is the transformation that Jung pointed toward. In detachment we learn that love and freedom are not opposites, but companions. The soul that has detached carries no bitterness, because it no longer demands. It carries no desperation, because it no longer seeks what is already within. Instead, it carries a quiet strength, and a tenderness that does not depend on possession. This is perhaps the most difficult truth of all, that what we believed we could only find in the presence of another, has always lived in the depth of our own being. When this realization takes root, detachment is complete. The other remains as memory, as symbol, as part of our history, but they no longer hold our soul hostage. We have taken back what was ours, and in doing so, we have gained not only freedom, but a deeper capacity for love. For to love from wholeness is to love without fear of loss. It is to give freely, because nothing essential can ever be taken away. The final stage of detachment is not about forgetting, and it is not about erasing the past. It is about carrying the past differently. Jung believed that nothing in the psyche is wasted. Every bond, every wound, every longing, becomes part of the great pattern of the soul. To detach fully is to find peace with this pattern, to accept that the other person was not an accident, but a necessary figure in our unfolding. They arrived not to complete us, but to awaken us, and in their absence we are invited to continue the journey alone, but no longer incomplete. When detachment ripens into its last form, it brings with it a sense of stillness that does not depend on circumstance. The need to grasp has dissolved, the fear of loss has softened, and what remains is a quiet trust in the life of the soul. Jung often wrote of individuation as a movement toward the self, that larger totality which transcends the ego. In this larger view every attachment, every grief, every release, is seen as part of a greater wholeness. Detachment is not a rejection of love, but an alignment with that wholeness. In this state, memory is no longer a chain. It becomes a gentle presence that can be visited without being consumed. We may recall the voice, the gestures, the moments once shared, but they no longer pierce the heart with the same sharpness. Instead, they rest like stones at the bottom of a clear river, visible, but no longer obstructing the flow. The river moves forward, the stones remain, but they are part of its shape, not its prison. This final freedom does not arrive with celebration. It arrives quietly, in the way we wake up one morning and realize we have not thought of them in days. It arrives in the way we meet someone new without comparing them to the past. It arrives in the way we can stand alone, and not feel abandoned. It arrives in the way we can love again, without fear of chains. This is the soul at peace with its own rhythm. And from this peace grows a deeper understanding of love itself. We see that attachment in its painful form was never love at all, but a projection of our unmet needs. True love begins only when detachment has been achieved. For only then can we meet another as they are, without demanding that they carry what we have not claimed in ourselves. Only then can love be free, and not a disguised form of hunger. Only then can it be a gift, rather than a bargain. Jung's great insight was that every tie we form is a mirror. To detach is not to break the mirror, but to realize that the reflection was always our own. Once we accept this, the power of the bond dissolves. We carry its lesson forward, but we no longer chase its image. We become whole not by holding on to another, but by embracing what has always lived within. So in the end, emotional detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. It is not the denial of love, it is the purification of love. It is the movement from projection to recognition, from need to freedom, from dependence to presence. It is the transformation of pain into wisdom, of loss into strength. And when we reach this point, we no longer ask how to let go, because letting go has already happened, in the natural rhythm of becoming. This is the gift of Jung's vision, that even in our deepest heartbreaks, there lies an invitation to wholeness. That the bonds which once felt like chains can become the very paths that lead us inward. And that detachment, far from being emptiness, is the gateway to a richer, more expansive love, a love rooted not in need but in freedom, not in fear, but in truth. And so we come to the end of this reflection on Jung and the path of emotional detachment. It is a path many of us are forced to walk, not by choice, but by circumstance. It begins in pain, in longing, in the desperate grip of the heart that does not want to release what it believes it cannot live without. Yet slowly, through grief, through silence, through patience, the bond transforms. What once seemed like a chain becomes a teacher. What once felt like loss becomes a kind of return to the self. Jung gave us a way to see this journey, not as failure, but as meaning. He reminded us that every tie, whether fleeting or lifelong, carries pieces of our own unconscious. To love someone deeply is to hand them the keys to hidden chambers within us. And when they are gone, the doors do not close again. Instead, they stand open, calling us inward, to discover what we once believed could only exist in the presence of another. Detachment in this sense is not the end of love, but the unfolding of it. It is love purified, of need, of hunger, of fear. It is love that no longer asks for possession, but simply allows both self and other to exist freely. To detach is to recognize that we do not lose the essence of what we have given or received. The tenderness remains, the lessons remain, the growth remains. What is gone is only the illusion that our wholeness depended on someone outside ourselves. When we accept this, something extraordinary happens. The heart no longer closes, it opens wider. Freed from the desperation of clinging, it can give without trembling, it can care without demanding, it can love without chains. This is the paradox Jung understood so deeply, that letting go does not empty us, but makes us vast. For when we reclaim the projections we once placed on others, we realize that the beauty, the strength, the tenderness we sought, was always ours to begin with. This is why detachment is not cold, it is compassionate. It does not deny feeling, it deepens it. It does not erase memory, it honors it. It does not turn the other into a stranger, it simply allows them to return to their rightful place, as part of our story, but no longer the center of it. And from that place, we continue forward, lighter, freer, more attuned to the rhythm of our own becoming. So if you find yourself in the midst of letting go, remember this path is not about forcing the heart into silence. It is about listening to what the heart is truly asking for. Beneath the longing lies a call to return to yourself. Beneath the pain lies the possibility of transformation. Each tear, each restless night, each remembered moment is part of the soul's way of healing. Trust this process. Trust that what feels like breaking is also a kind of opening. And in time, you will look back and see that what once felt unbearable became the very ground on which you stood, stronger and more whole. You will see that the person you thought you could never release has in fact given you a gift far greater than their presence. They have given you the chance to meet yourself more deeply than ever before. This is the quiet promise at the heart of Jung's vision, that nothing is wasted, not even heartbreak. That every bond, every loss, every letting go, carries within it the seeds of a fuller life. And that detachment, far from being emptiness, is a doorway into a love that is wider, freer, and truer than anything we have known before. So let us walk away from this reflection, not with heaviness, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the ties that shaped us, for the pain that taught us, for the freedom that awaits us. Gratitude for the chance to return, always, to the center of our own being, where love is not lost, but reborn. And may we carry this truth gently in our hearts. That to let go is not to lose. To let go is to find.